You ready?
Yes, I am.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Reptile Rendezvous. I'm your host, Alex and all her animals. If you love the ocean, marine life, or just have a curious spirit, then you're really going to enjoy today's episode. Today, we're diving deep, pun intended, into the world of all things marine with our guest, Nick. Nick is a marine biologist, an avid scuba diver, and an incredible photographer who captures the beauty of underwater life like no one else. Thank you for being on the show today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Yeah, thank you so much again for inviting me on here. I love these types of opportunities and I'm excited to kind of share what I'm passionate about. So thank you.
Originally, I was kind of like, before you really got into it and we chatted about it, yeah, as I said, so much fun to learn about like seahorses and
Mhm.
it's the
Yes,
pipefish.
pipefish. Yes.
We'll start with tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Nick Davis. I currently live in Daytona Beach, Florida, so on the east coast of the Florida Peninsula. So, what I do currently, I am a marine biologist, but I'm currently a graduate student at Bethune-Cookman University, a part of the Masters of Integrated Environmental Science program. I received my bachelor's degree in environmental marine sciences with an emphasis in marine biology back in May of 2022. And since then, I've been lucky enough to live in the Florida Keys for a bit of time, to be a marine science educator. And then from there, I moved up a bit north in Florida to Titusville, Florida, also on the eastern coast of the state, where I did a 9-month marine conservation and biodiversity internship where we did a lot of diving, we did a lot of photography, and we also developed a bit of a biodiversity report of the Indian River Lagoon here, which I'm actually currently working in for my master's thesis research. So that's kind of where I've been as of now in my career.
And you might have to, speaking of location, you might have to do an emergency evacuation. So we'll hope
Right.
that you
Yes,
don't
and
have
I've been watching
to.
closely with the hurricane. Hopefully, I don't have to evacuate, but I'm fully prepared to take my chinchilla with me in case I need to go up north. But yes, hopefully everything is fine, and I really feel for everyone in the state. Kind of
Me
anxiety
too.
inducing, to say the least.
Yeah, I've never experienced anything like that. Like in England, we don't really have anything, any natural disasters or any
Right,
extreme weathers or anything. So I know
right.
that the media probably hype it up, but they have been appropriately scaring people because
Yes,
I'm messaging everyone. I'm like, are you okay? I just
right,
there's nothing I can do, but it's
right.
like make sure you even with you, I was like, if you need to reschedule, it's fine. If I don't
Yeah.
hear from you, I'll just assume that you
Yes.
know you're either
Thank
busy or
you.
you don't have Wi-Fi. But it's
Right.
yeah, it's madness. But by the time this episode comes out, it will all have. I don't want to say blown over because that sounds like a
Yes.
bad pun.
Yes. Hopefully it'll
So
be sunshine and rainbows.
back to sunshine, rainbows, and
Yes.
seahorses. That sounds like lyrics, doesn't it?
It does.
Sunshine. I'm thinking of sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. That's what I was thinking of. So, what sparked your interest in marine biology? Was there a moment that made you say, "This is what I want to do"?
Right. So ever since I can remember, when I was younger, this is gonna sound such a cliche, but as long as I can remember, I've always had this love for animals and nature and wildlife as a whole, but especially aquatic systems. And so I grew up in Indiana, which is kind of the northern part of the United States. We don't have the ocean, but I grew up very close to lakes. And so spending my summers at the lakes, observing fish, turtles, having that hands on experience at a young age definitely sparked this interest. And then something that I will always remember when I was in elementary school, it was around first grade. Wasn't the best reader. I was actually in this reading recovery program, but something that really encouraged me to read and become a better reader was ocean books. And I specifically remember my first grade teacher, she would um, gift me these ocean books, and I feel that that has definitely kind of sparked this really deep interest in marine biology. And so I've had it since I was young and it hasn't really left. So I think it was kind of in that moment where I was very young and learning to read, I guess. Yeah, I feel like it's things like that, having a good teacher throughout your younger academic years can definitely influence your career when you grow up. And so teachers are amazing. My mom and my oldest sister are teachers, so I will always have a fondness for teachers.
Shout out to teachers. We love
Yes,
you.
yes, we do.
I need to think the pronunciation because we were talking about it when I was doing my research about what kind of questions I wanted to ask. I came across this word and I learned it. Syngnathidae. No, was that it?
Yes, no, you did really. Yes, syngnathidae, the family syngnathidae. You did
Yeah.
so good. Oh my gosh. So yes, you were correct. So yes, so this
So
family
what is a syngnathidae? Sorry,
yeah, so
delay.
syngnathids, no, you're fine. Syngnathidae is the family of fishes that include pipefish, seahorses, and sea dragons. This is a leafy sea dragon.
I love
And
that.
so,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I
and
was
so,
just gonna.
yes, I love it. But what this word means, and so it's taking, I believe, these Greek roots, the Greek word sin, and then the Greek word nath, sin meaning fused, nath meaning jaw. And so essentially this is meaning fused jaw. And that's because our syngnathed fish, such as pipefish and our seahorses and our sea dragons, they have this fused jaw. And of course, they have that very pronounced tubular snout as well. And then their jaws at the end of it. So that's kind of how this family gets their name, Syngnathidae.
So, can you share one of your most memorable underwater experiences while scuba diving?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I feel like anytime I go scuba diving, there's always some point of the dive that becomes like super memorable. But I think for me, one of the most memorable events that comes to my mind was on my birthday in 2023. So, May of 2023, we went on a diving trip down to Blue Heron Bridge in West Palm Beach, which is one of my all time favorite diving places of all time. And one of my biggest goals was to finally see a spotted eagle ray under the water. Now, I've seen spotted eagle rays while standing on a bridge or out of water, but it's always been, I've always had the worst of luck of seeing them while I was underwater. I'd either not get into the water in time when other people got in and saw it there, it'd be disappeared by the time I got in the water. Or there was even this one time I was taking this video of this Cassiopeia upside down jellyfish.
I love
And I
this.
was watching this video later on in the day and I see this shadow in the background. And so I adjust the contrast and everything to see what it was. And as I did that, I was like, there was a spotted eagle ray in front of my face, that whole snorkel, and I somehow missed the whole thing. And so it's always been experiences like
So
this.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt so silly. I was like,
Typical.
oh my gosh. But during this scuba dive, near the end of this dive, I don't know, I just really felt like we were going to see the eagle rays this day. It was in May. We tend to they tend to be there quite frequently, especially in the end of spring. And so I was going along my way, and my internship supervisor at the time, he kind of pats me on the shoulder, and I'm like, where am I supposed to look? And he kind of just redirects me into the direction of a spotted eagle ray gliding over us. And so that was just the coolest thing ever. And then we kind of just stayed there for a bit, and there was a few more that came out, and they just kind of surrounded us. And so to me, that felt like a really special moment. Here in Florida, eagle rays are quite a common sight. Now, when I go diving, I see them quite frequently, and I'm always just like, I love it. But I don't know, I feel like even sometimes just those common sights while diving, they can just be so special, especially that time. It was my birthday, and I finally saw one of my most favorite animals in the world ever. And so yeah, I guess just like being able to see your favorite animal in its natural environment, just kind of doing its thing. I feel like those moments are always so special. I love it. So another really cool moment, I feel like I can't leave this one out. This wasn't during a scuba dive. This was during a snorkel. And so when I was in undergrad getting my bachelor's degree, I was lucky enough to go to a university that has a facility down in the Florida Keys. And so I'm originally from Indiana. I think I mentioned that earlier. So I went to an Indiana college. People often ask me, how did you get a marine biology degree in Indiana? I was like, well, we have this really cool marine program and we have a facility down in the Florida Keys. But anyways, when we were living down there for one of our courses, we would often go out and do these labs where we were examining essentially, I guess, the wildlife out in these different environments. And so this one environment we went out to was a hard bottom site. And so what a hard bottom site is, essentially, there's this old limestone layer as the substrate. And so hard bottom, it literally has like a hard, like stony bottom at the bottom of it. And there's primarily sponges. Yeah.
I'm trying not to laugh at the word bottom because I'm immature.
No, it's okay. It's kind of a funny word. But these habitats are primarily comprised of like sponges and soft corals and everything. And so we were out there examining we were examining the different fish forms that are out there, because these sites also act as kind of an intermediate nursery ground for reef fish. And so we were examining these different fish forms, as well as the different types of juvenile reef fish that were inhabiting that area. And so we were out there. The visibility wasn't really all that great, but it wasn't too awful. But we were kind of out there. We were seeing some cool stuff, but it was just kind of the general stuff that we would usually see. But then one of my friends tapped me on the shoulder. I'm kind of facing this way. She's over here. And so like I slowly turn around and I see these giant shadows coming towards us. And there's like 7 very large adult manatees that just kind of swim through the area we were examining. And so that was just like, oh my gosh, you're just kind of sitting there, just letting them do their thing. And I'm a pretty tall person. I'm about 6'5" or so, but these manatees were much longer than me. And so it was just such a very humbling and just amazing experience being in the presence of something that was just so much larger than I was. And then kind of similarly to those spotted eagle rays, they seemed kind of curious of us almost. And they just kind of stuck around. They circled us for a bit before they eventually went on their way. And so that too is just also a very, very memorable moment. But like I said before, I feel like anytime in the water, there's always something that will always stick into my mind.
I've never really done anything like that. I'm super excited to eventually do stuff like that. I bet it's just absolutely phenomenal, just diving generally. And then when you have experiences like that, it must be so surreal. And I guess if you've never experienced it, it's hard to comprehend just the idea of it. But really cool at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. No, you're gonna love it. And it's even more special when these, mind you, very large animals just come out of nowhere, like you're just not expecting it.
Yeah, you would think you would at least, I don't know, hear something or
sense
it or feel the waves. I don't know what the equivalent of like Jurassic Park glass of water shaking is or underwater, but yeah. Oops. Okay, well I accidentally clicked that, but we'll go for it. So if you could dive anywhere in the world right now, where would it be and why?
Oh yes, there are so many places I want to dive in the world. So obviously I feel like any scuba diver's dream is to go dive the Great Barrier Reef, especially since the way that our climate is kind of projected and the way that the way that coral reefs are really going to take a lot of perturbation and pressures from our climate and changing water parameters and whatnot that come from that. I would love to see the Great Barrier Reef before it's maybe completely gone. So that's a dream of mine, but there's also traditionally there's been a lot of biodiversity. There's biodiversity, a ton of biodiversity on reefs everywhere, but out in the Great Barrier Reef, very biodiverse and a lot of species that I'd love to see, like zebra sharks. I would love to see a zebra shark. But I think also in Australia, I want to go diving. I believe it's near the southern end of Australia. I can't really pinpoint the exact location, but I want to see leafy sea dragons in real life. I've seen them in real life, but I want to see them in the wild. I want to see them in their wild kelp setting, algae setting. It would be a very cold dive. It's kind of cold down in that area in those waters, but it would definitely be worth it. And then also, I really want to go to Indonesia and go diving there. Indonesia has always been a dream of mine to go to. And there's these amazing areas where there's these mangrove forests, and then in the water there's these pretty shallow coral reefs there, and I would just love to experience those two environments that I love so much kind of coexisting with one another. I think those are some of my dream locations.
So, mentioning seahorses briefly, what's the most surprising thing you've learned about seahorses that you think most people don't know?
Right. There is just so much about seahorses. But I think something that I just always love to tell people, I think it's the cutest thing ever. But especially during times of mating and courting with our seahorses, oftentimes a male female pair that has paired up, they will often greet each other in the morning. So when they do this, they'll often do these little dances. And so of course, with our seahorses, the female has to be able to accurately deposit those eggs into the male's pouch, and so they need to make sure that they're able to be really coordinated with one another. And so they do these dances to court each other. They help kind of configure the way in which they move with one another, but they also greet each other to ensure, it's often thought to ensure that their mate is like still living and everything. And so I think that's just the sweetest thing ever. And then also with my dwarf seahorses, I often see this happening in the morning time. They'll do these little courting dances, and then in the afternoon they'll kind of go their separate ways until it's eventually time to have a egg transfer between the male and female. So I think that is one of my most favorite things about seahorses.
They are really cool, and yeah, they're one of those species that the males carry the. It's not eggs, is it? Is it
Yeah,
eggs?
it's eggs. Yeah.
Yeah, it is eggs. Yeah. So the males carry the eggs. That's like I don't know how many species that happens with, but that's something
Yeah, there's
that
a few like there's some other fish species where the males kind of tend to the eggs, they'll tend to the eggs in their mouth. But the thing that makes syngnathidae fish such as our seahorses and then some of our pipefish species that also have brood pouches is that they have these specialized pouches that the eggs go into. And these pouches, they're quite vascularized, and some of the tissues in there act very similar to a placenta that you'll see in a mammal. And so that's something that I have always found interesting as well. And so they're highly vascularized. The male does a really good job at keeping the eggs aerated, so they're able to be free from disease or whatever. But it's just so cool because once the eggs are deposited directly into the pouch, the male will then fertilize them. And so essentially, unlike some other fish that do that spawn openly, where the eggs are just kind of shed from the female, and then of course the male sends out his sperm cells into the water column to hopefully get everything fertilized. With our seahorses, it leaves a better chance for a lot more of those eggs to get fertilized and to be protected during the duration of their development. And so in this brood pouch, the eggs, they'll be fertilized. They're going to develop in there. They're not just floating around in the water column like some other fish species eggs often do. And then once the eggs hatch, the very tiny larvae will also have a bit of time to develop in there as well, giving them a little bit of a better chance. And then eventually they'll be released from that brood pouch. And so it's just a really cool system. Right.
I know that was an amazing impression. I know.
No, it was a very spot on impression, I'd have to say. But it's a really amazing system that our syngnathidae fish have developed.
I wonder why, like the evolutionary,
right?
Just the what's the word? They
like the
evolved.
Adaptation, is that the word you were thinking of? Like how that formed? Yeah, I've always been curious about that as well, and I know there's been kind of some studies on that, but that's definitely something that I want to look into more as well. But with some other syngnathidae species like our sea dragons and some pipefish species, they actually don't have a brood pouch, but the fathers will still care for the eggs. They'll just be adhered externally to their abdomen. So
yeah, I
the male
remember you saying that quite protective.
Yeah.
I think you've even got a video. I think when when I add B-roll, I'm sure I'll add videos on top of it so people can see
That
what
sounds
we're
good.
referring to.
I know. I was gonna say I have both seahorse video and pipefish videos.
I was saying the other day how much I love everything you post,
Oh,
especially
thank
the
you so much.
pufferfish, who I got to meet.
Yes.
I got to meet last week. I
Yes.
think a lot of people were jealous when I put that screenshot up.
Got to meet her face to face.
They've just got so much personality as well. It's I guess if someone doesn't know much about pufferfish,
Right.
they it's probably one of those things that they don't really think about. We will talk about the animals that you do have in a second. We bonded so hard over that. I was like, I didn't realize until I really like I've been following you for a while, but then and I checked your highlights just before we were going to record last week, and I was like, I didn't know you had this and that and this, and I was like, oh my gosh! If you could study any marine species without limitations, which one would it be and why?
Hmm. There are just so many species I'd like to study. If I didn't have any limitations at all, I would love to venture down into the deep sea and study deep sea anglerfish. I don't know what it is about deep sea anglerfish, but I love them so much. If I had an opportunity to study them, that'd be really cool. But I guess something that I'm always going to turn back to are sharks and rays, very heavy on the rays. For whatever reason, growing up, like I often in my videos, I'm often like, oh, this is one of my favorites. Saying that for like every single little thing. But
Yeah.
truly, I think stingrays, manta rays, any type of ray are truly my favorites for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it's been like that for the longest time. So if I was able to study rays without limitations, that'd be really cool. I would love to study sawfish, which are actually a type of ray. Because here in Florida, they're critically endangered, our small tooth sawfish. And recently, there has seemed to be a bit of die off due to a disease that was going around. There was like this spinning disease. They were often seeing small tooth sawfish down in the Florida Keys doing that characteristic spin from that disease. So if I was able to study these critically endangered sawfish without limitations and potentially shed light on their populations and their ecology in Florida, I would love to do that. It could be beneficial.
If anyone sees me looking down as well, like it's because I'm looking after a dog and she's
That's
next to
okay.
me. She's kind of that grey blob. So that's why I'm kind of just making sure, just for the viewers, they're probably like, why does she keep looking down? I'm always distracted by something. It's having animals in front of me. I'm just kind of like, why did I do this? But she's chill at the moment, so passed out. All the excitement of meeting all these new animals that she's never smelt or had anything to do with before. It's very, very tiring, of course.
Aww.
What's the coolest marine creature you've encountered while diving and what made it special?
So for me, I don't know what it is, but a lot of people love the really big animals, which I do too. I love our megafauna. But something for me, I actually saw this while on a snorkel. So I wasn't on full scuba or anything. But I remember one time I was at one of my favorite diving locations in the Florida Keys, and I was observing this clump of mangrove or orange tunicates, which tunicates, they're also called sea squirts. They're just they're sessile. They look like this blob almost, and there's kind of like this colony of blobs, orange blobs. And I was observing this colony, and I noticed this flatworm on this colony of tunicates. It's a lined flatworm. I believe it has some other names as well, like tiger flatworm or something along those lines. But it was this beautiful flatworm. It had this orange coloration on it from the orange tunicates that it's feeding on. And I don't know, there was just something so magnificent about this tiny flatworm feeding on these tunicates. And so that was really, really cool to me. But then also, kind of once again, going back to the smaller things, one of my favorite snail species is this snail. It's kind of closely related to cowrie snails. I'll give you a picture to put on here. But it's called a flamingo tongue, and it has the most amazing coloration. on its mantle. And so something that's interesting about it is that it exclusively feeds on soft corals. And so there's this one time I was on a snorkel again, and I was going along this kind of garden of these Gorgonian soft corals, and I noticed this very bright orange snail with this almost giraffe-like pattern over its shell, and I was like, "Oh, that's a flamingo tongue." And so it was really cool being able to see that snail kind of in action, feeding on these soft corals for the first time. But those snails are really cool. Something that they do is that they actually cover their shell with a bit of their soft tissue, or called their mantle. And this mantle, it's just so vibrantly colored. It's kind of a warning symbol because these snails are somewhat toxic from the soft coral flesh that they're feeding on. And so they're one of my favorites. And so I think oftentimes, like, seeing an eagle ray and seeing a stingray is often always so special. But there's some of these more, I guess, rarer in a sense, where if you didn't know exactly where to look, you probably wouldn't see some of these animals, like these flatworms feeding on a tunicate. Not many people are wanting to watch this colony of tunicates, but if you do, you might find some of these. You might find some of these really cool macro species. So,
yeah, that's really cool. I really like it when people appreciate the smaller ones or the often overlooked ones. Of course, I appreciate every animal. It's so interesting. Like, I don't know anything about this kind of thing. The entire podcast is a learning experience for everyone, including myself. Like, I'm learning so much, and I'm enjoying learning about everything and all the different types of wonderful creatures that are out there, especially in the sea, because the sea is just like
so vast,
kind of terrifying because it's so vast and unexplored. I feel sorry for blobfish.
Me too. I love our blobfish.
A lot of people don't know that they only are like that because of the water pressure when they're just like up from so deep that it just basically just their whole bone like structure and everything just implodes. Yeah. It's like, oh, that's a funny looking thing. And it's like, it doesn't actually look like that, though.
It doesn't look like that.
Justice for blobfish.
Honestly, yes, justice for our blobfish. Oh my gosh.
That should be like the title of the episode. It's true, though. It's like, just leave them be.
Yes.
I don't know. I guess studying's different. But if you want to study them, I don't know. They're not really something that if you have to just maim them just to get them up to the surface, do we get anything from that?
I feel like oftentimes fish such as our blobfish, I don't know if they're necessarily targeted per se, but like when people are doing like deep sea fishing trawls, they're often just bycatch, if that makes sense. And so they're drug up, and then of course, like if you see this weird pink thing, someone's going to take a picture of it. But I mean, sometimes I guess through those trawls and through that bycatch, like we don't want bycatch to happen, but seeing what comes in bycatch can kind of give us an indication of some of these, I guess, these deep sea species in terms of populations, if that makes sense. But of course, if that happens too often, we don't really know these deep sea fishes' populations all that well, and so we could very well catch them to the point where it's not good for those populations and we might not know. But I don't know, I guess you could get a little bit out of stuff like that, but I'm not, I don't know.
If it just happens accidentally, then I suppose it's you got to try and get the good out of it, haven't you?
Right. And I guess from that, something that we can stem from that is just kind of promoting more sustainable ways in which we do fishing, where we're trying not to like sometimes it's unfortunately inevitable, but just trying not to using fishing strategies that don't target, that also don't catch some of those unintended species where we don't want to kind of mess with their populations. I guess that's something that was steps from that conversation.
I was going to say, what kind of species are they? What gets affected by ways?
So there's a lot of species. So actually sea turtles with some of these methods, they can often get wound up in long lining methods where there's essentially this long line. There's hooks with bait. And so there's often species like our sea turtles, even larger species like manta rays that can get affected by some of that fishing gear that's just kind of out there. There's also methods called bottom trawling, where you're kind of literally just taking this type of trawl with a net. It's kind of just dragging at the bottom of the ocean. So it's kind of disturbing habitats that are there. And also, once again, potentially picking up bycatch like our blobfish, potentially. So there's a lot of different species that can be affected by that. But of course, the more notable ones are our sea turtles, our dolphins that are caught in nets and stuff like that as well. I know there's a lot of work out there to kind of try to see what types of fishing methods are the most sustainable to kind of avoid bycatch.
Sustainable, yeah. I was thinking
Yeah,
sustainable. Unethical.
Yeah.
In terms of the ecosystem, is it similar to when you go herping and you pick up a rock and you see that there's sort of like a little
ecosystem there?
The ecosystems, yeah. So if you weren't to put the rock back, that how that would all be affected. Is it similar like that with the bottom trawling? Is that a good way to? I'm just trying to understand it.
I could see how that could be kind of analogous to that, because I guess when you do this bottom trawl, you're not intending to really mess up the habitat that's down there, because that's not what you're targeting. I guess when you pick up that rock, you're not intending to mess with that little ecosystem there. But of course, once you do that trawl and you dredge up all of these, whether it's like coral or sponges or mess up this other habitat, that damage is kind of done if you intended to damage that habitat or not. So I guess like with that rock analogy, once you pick up the rock, are you able to put that rock back the right way where it needs to be? So I can kind of see where there could be those similarities there. Just of course the rock being a bit of a smaller scale, and then this bottom trawling, dredging, fishing methods kind of at a much larger scale.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a good thing to compare to. I just, it made me think of that, and I thought I'm a visual learner.
Right?
So
No, I can definitely see the comparisons there though, because I feel that overall, of course, with fishing methods, like of course they want to catch fish, but there's obviously species like they're not going out there to try to catch a sea turtle, but they caught the sea turtle. That sea turtle is now stressed out, and who knows what's going to happen once they release it. So. Even if you're not intending to do something through some of these methods, there can still be some negative outcomes, similar to picking up a rock. Like, who knows what that maybe messed with, whether you intended it to or not.
You're just trying to make me feel better because it was a bad analogy.
No, I can see the comparisons. I liked it. I like the connections there.
Are there any ways that people can help sustainable fishing in their day-to-day lives? Like, what can people do if they want to make a change or adjustment?
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things that I've known is to pick species that you know are sustainable in a sense. So what comes to my mind is our species like mahi-mahi or dolphin fish. And so they have so in terms of our mahi-mahi, the rate in which they reach maturity to be able to reproduce, it doesn't take as long for them to reach that rate as if it in comparison to something like a grouper. And so if we're fishing mahi-mahi, it's a little bit more sustainable in the sense that they're able to kind of repopulate themselves and bounce back from some of that fishing a bit easier than something that has a slower rate of maturity like a grouper or something of that sort. And then also fish that are deep sea fish. And so I was kind of touching on before that with some of these fish that are living at deeper depths, we maybe don't really know much about their populations. And so there's actually this one fish called an orange roughy that I don't know exactly how deep it lives, but it has often been sold, I think, at kind of a very high price. But it's this deeper living fish. We don't really know what its populations are like, but people fish for them intentionally to be able to sell them. but we're not entirely sure how the fishing may be affecting their populations or not. And so, just overall, I guess just picking fish and seafood that is a bit more sustainable. And then also, if what's even better is if you're able to buy locally fished foods as well. I know it's harder for people that are a bit more landlocked, but like here in Florida, I could go to a fish market and they'd have fish from people that were locals. You can often find out if they used, sustainable methods that didn't harm the environment as well. And so I guess just being informed about where your fish and seafood come from is kind of the best thing you could probably do, I'd say. There's probably other ways too, but that's what comes to my mind right away.
I don't know if I'm correct. I think I read it somewhere like once, and then I kind of absorbed the information, but then I didn't actually fact check it. So the reason why caviar is so expensive is because the fish take ages and ages to get to maturity. It takes like 18 years or something silly.
Yeah, sturgeon, they have quite a long rate of maturity. I'm not entirely sure how long it takes, but from my understanding, yeah, they take quite a bit of a long time to reach maturity and whatnot.
It's just one of those internet rabbit holes that you just somehow ended up. This is why caviar is so expensive, because it takes 18 years for it to reach maturity, and then you've got to wait for the next one after that. And
yeah, I think it's something along those lines. But I think that's I guess for me, that's just one of those things that I also need to look into. But I'm often not looking to have caviar, so I guess maybe that's why I haven't really researched.
I don't think I've ever had caviar. Before I forget, I want to shout out to Greg's Turtle Haven before I forget, because I'm wearing one of the t-shirts, which you can find on Bonfire if you want one. Got to plug Greg, of course.
Love it.
Are there any common misconceptions that should be... what's a common misconception people have about the ocean or marine wildlife that you'd like to clear up?
I feel like there often are quite a few. Something that, as someone that loves stingrays, something that comes to my mind is that, people think stingrays are very hostile, even though anytime I've encountered a stingray, they always want to go the opposite way of me. So I feel like that's a pretty common misconception. I've often heard people ask me, like if I was helping with like a snorkeling trip, they'd say, "Oh, there's a stingray. Is it going to come up and attack me?" And I was like, probably not. That's probably not going to be the case. If anything, it's going to go away from you. They're quite skittish for the most part.
There's a whole generation mad at them.
I know.
People mad at stingrays.
I know, and I can definitely see where that fear kind of stems from. But for the most part, at least with my interaction with rays, they've often been quite sweet, or they just don't want anything to do with me, and they'll kind of jet off the other way.
That's the ironic part.
Right.
We were talking about it before, weren't we?
Yes, we have.
It's crazy that they don't usually, all the different animals and wild things that Steve Owen was... there's a lot of misconceptions about crocodiles and alligators and that kind of thing, but for a stingray to take him out, it was just, I don't know, it's a conspiracy.
Yeah, I feel like that was very... yeah, very freak.
It's so ridiculous that it's believable.
Right. But I think thinking about other misconceptions, I guess kind of thinking about porcupine fish, since we have our porcupine fish here. I've often been asked what would happen if I was to, I guess, handle or touch my porcupine fish while it was inflated in a ball with all those spikes out. And honestly, there is the risk of being poked. I have been poked before when transferring one of my fish. I prefer not to use nets because obviously if they inflate themselves, those spines will go right through those nets. They'll get stuck. It'll be hard for them to deflate themselves. But a lot of people think that porcupine fish are venomous, and they're not venomous. You're not going to be envenomated if you were to be poked by a porcupine fish. But of course, obviously, with our puffers and some of our porcupine fish species, they can be poisonous. So if you were to ingest the flesh, in some species in particular areas, such as the liver or ovaries, you can often die from that. Potency can differ between species.
I was going to say, what's the one that they have in Japan? It's a popular sushi, and if it's cut the wrong way.
Oh yeah, they have the fugu puffer, which I think fugu is just I think it's just puffer in Japanese. So I don't entirely know the exact species. I think the exact species, like, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right or not, but it's like takifugu or takifugu, something along those lines. But there is often a that this species of pufferfish out in Japan that is harvested for those purposes of um, being eaten. And of course, it's the whole thing with the very highly trained chefs that know how to prepare it to avoid those toxins. But yeah, the toxins that are pufferfish and some other fish that are within this Tetraodontiformes order, which also includes, our boxfish. A lot of them are they'll release
Love a
toxins
boxfish.
actually. Yes, love them. Also within this order, you have your triggerfish. You also have your very large mola mola ocean sunfish that are in this order as well. So they're all kind of related somewhat. But a lot of these fish in this order, because they aren't really, a lot of them are very slow swimmers. And so to kind of make up for that, to, I guess, deter predators. Of course, some of these fish, like our puffer fish, they have that tactic where they inflate themselves. Our porcupine fish, they have those spines where when they inflate themselves, it makes it a lot harder for a fish to bite down. But also a lot of these fish will produce toxins that are known as tetrodotoxins. And so they'll produce those types of toxins, but also with some species, they'll actually accumulate toxins in their body from the shellfish that they eat. And these are known as saxitoxins. And so these types of toxins, they're, of course, shellfish like oysters and clams are filter feeders. And so as they're filter feeding, they'll sometimes accumulate these little dinoflagellates that produce these toxins. And then, of course, from there, some of these fish, like, yeah.
Dinoflagellates.
Dinoflagellate. It's a very fun word. But as these oysters kind of accumulate these toxins from those dinoflagellates, the puffers that are very avid oyster eaters, many puffer species, they'll eat those oysters and they'll also accumulate those toxins in them, and they'll kind of bioaccumulate in their body. And so that also kind of acts as a bit of a defense from them, because predators and people can also be inflicted by those saxitoxins that are in those fish.
Sorry, I don't know if you heard that. She just started
I did.
You're right, sweetie pie? You're right? Is it similar to dart frogs that in captivity they aren't poisonous, but in the wild they are because of their diet? Like, is it the same?
Yeah, it's kind of that similar interaction between diet and the accumulation of toxins in them. Also with our flamingo tongue snail that I was talking about, because it ingests the flesh of this coral that has toxins in there, it's also toxic. There's also a lot of, I'm about to go down a rabbit hole, but there's also a lot of really cool nudibranch species that feed on cnidarians such as jellies and corals, and they're actually able to kind of steal some of those toxins. As this is kind of a different mechanism, but they're actually kind of able to steal some of those toxins from those food items as well. And so it's a very similar interaction. But of course, with some of these puffer species, they're also creating their own toxins in their body, that tetrodotoxin. And so some of these species will have both defenses of tetrodotoxin and the saxitoxin in them.
Again, it's just something that I'm familiar with. Just
right.
I was stroking her, and then she was like, "I chew your fingers." You chew my fingers, young lady, ma'am. Oh, butter wouldn't melt, would it? Look at that face.
Aww.
She's a sweetie. Did you hear me in the background just going, "Stop it"?
I don't think I've heard a little bit of the barking, but I don't know if I heard you.
What role do seahorses and pipefish play in their ecosystems, and why are they so important to marine biodiversity?
Yeah, so our syngnathic fish, like our seahorses and pipefish, they have very strong linkages to especially seagrass environments and other environments of submerged aquatic vegetation like algae. But oftentimes they're very connected to seagrass environments. And so in those environments, our seahorses and pipefish, they actually play quite a big role as a predator as a predator, preying upon some of these smaller crustaceans such as amphipods and copepods. And so they really help keep the balance of these species that reproduce quite a bit. And our seahorses and pipefish eat quite a lot as well. They don't really have a true stomach. They just kind of have this long tube that runs through them. And so they eat quite a bit, and they help control these populations that may be kind of out of control if we didn't have our pipefish and seahorses there to prey upon them. And so they're quite an important predator. And whenever I correlate a pipefish or a seahorse to a predator, people are often quite surprised to learn that they're carnivorous. And it's like, well, they're feeding on these small animals.
We were talking about the seagrass environments, and was that a recent study or was that a research? I think it was a research project that you did.
Where we were examining the decline of syngnathidae fish in the lagoon. Yeah. So this summer, so the lab I'm a part of at Bethune-Cookman University, we are the aerial lab. Originally called Aquatic Research Lab, but now we're kind of integrating some of the educational research that my professor, Dr. Sarah Krejci, does. And so we're the, it's Aquatic Research Education Lab. It's something along those lines. I need to better memorize the thing. But of course, we're doing a lot of aquatic research there as well. And so during this summer, during this program that my professor, Dr. Krejci, leads, known as the RISE program, it gives opportunities for undergrad students to have an opportunity in doing some sort of research that kind of links to their interest. And so with our lab having, of course, a really big emphasis on syngnathidae fish, such as our seahorses and pipefish. That's kind of our specialty in a sense, but we do all things aquatics. But with that being our specialty, we were examining the decline of seahorses and pipefish in the Indian River Lagoon. So to kind of give some context of the Indian River Lagoon, of course, not everyone knows of it, but it's quite this large estuary along the eastern coast of Florida, kind of in the central region of the state. No, you're fine.
She was kicking me, and then she got carried away by rolling, and then just fell off the bed.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, you silly girl.
Oh, there she goes away down. But this Indian River Lagoon, it's this very long estuary. It's about 156 miles or about 251 kilometers, something around there. A very long estuary. And traditionally, it has served as an amazing environment for growing for seagrass. And so, of course, you have some seagrass dependent species there, such as our seahorse and pipefish, which used to kind of thrive there. Here in the lagoon, we've traditionally had two species of seahorse, the dwarf seahorse, Hippocampus zosteri, and then there was Hippocampus erectus, which is the lined seahorse, which is a larger species. And then, of course, we have several pipefish species. We have Syngnathidae scobelli, the Gulf pipefish, and Syngnathidae louisianae, the chain pipefish, which I'm currently studying for my master's thesis. So it supported this array of fish, but after perturbations such as runoff leading to things such as very excess nutrient input, which then leads to things such as harmful algal blooms that shade out our seagrasses, that has been quite a detrimental perturbation to these seagrass environments. Back in 2011 and 2012, there were these really big super bloom events where there was just massive blooms of these algae in the lagoon. And of course, the algae, as they're covering the surface of the lagoon, they're taking out oxygen out of the water. They're killing other species. And of course, when there isn't much light going into the system, because it's being shaded out by this algae, our seagrass can't grow and do its photosynthetic processes. And so the seagrass has kind of been on a little bit of a decline before then, but this was really just something that just wiped a lot of it out. A lot of people that I've talked to that have done work in the lagoon before these events, they would often tell me of these just rolling. Oops, sorry about that. Fell a little bit.
You dropped me.
But people that have worked in the lagoon in the past, they tell me about these flowing and very dense meadows seagrass in the Indian River Lagoon. And unfortunately, we just don't see that anymore. We see it in some places, like we kind of seen it in certain areas this summer when we would do sampling, but because there's been a lot of work done since then to kind of help bring back our seagrasses. And so these seagrass meadows have been quite decimated. And so for the longest time, of course, with our syngnathidae fish having those very tight linkages to seagrass meadows, especially our seahorses, they're very tightly linked to that seagrass. As seagrass has declined, our syngnathidae fish populations have declined as well. So going back to this summer, what we did, we were comparing data from my professor, Dr. Sarah Krejci's 2014 data when she was doing very similar things. We were kind of comparing this 10-year difference in terms of syngnathidae fish populations. And unfortunately, absolutely no seahorses this summer, whereas there were seahorses in her data set from 2014. And we did kind of see a little bit of a resurgence of the Gulf pipefish. They're just kind of everywhere. My professor, Dr. Krejci, calls them the roaches of the sea because if we're sampling for pipefish, we're probably definitely going to see that. And if we don't see a Gulf pipefish, then we just know that that's not a place that we need to be sampling. But quite a few Gulf pipefish, and then Syngnathidae louisianae.
Can I just? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I just going to check that she's not barking because she needs a toilet. I really didn't want to interrupt because I was like, I'm trying to listen. I was like subtly trying to clap like that. Like hopefully it's not too noisy. Before I forget, what causes the super blooms? Like, is there anything that happens? Like, what is the process with that? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so kind of to put it kind of comprehensively, so you have people using things such as fertilizer on their lawns. This fertilizer is packed with nutrients to help their lawn grow. There's also runoff that can occur from things such as sewage that also, of course, has a lot of nutrients in it as well. And so as we have kind of this really big influx of nutrients going into our waterways, mixed with other factors as well, such as water temperature and whatnot, this can lead to an overabundance of phytoplankton. So essentially these algae are little phytoplankton. They're very, very, very small, but they're able to use these excess nutrient inputs to really grow and increase their populations, causing these very, very large blooms. And so essentially these nutrients are fueling this algae to kind of erupt in populations, if that makes sense, causing a super bloom. It can happen naturally, but unfortunately, from what has been observed, a lot of it seems to really be anthropogenic or kind of human-led activities that lead to these super blooms, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's very unfortunate.
Frog slipper. Just to recap, we did talk about it briefly before. With your work, you have to take the seahorses and the pipefish. You have to take them out of their environment to study them. If people didn't get that already, it's important to just clarify that you do it as ethically as possible, and that you also don't take too many to the point where it would, like if it's a slow day, you won't take so many out just for research that it would actually affect the population. So I just wanted to bring that up just to clarify with people if they were wondering.
Yeah, and I guess thinking about these two studies, so this study that we did over the summer with these syngnathids where we were kind of examining their populations, all of those syngnathidae fish that we collected and measured and everything, those were all returned back into the lagoon. So those were all returned, but then with my work with the two pipefish species, so kind of going into that, essentially the crux of my research is trying to determine how the two pipefish species, Syngnathidae scoveli, the Gulf pipefish, and Syngnathidae louisianae, or chain pipefish, are kind of partitioning themselves in terms of resources to limit competition as their very important seagrass habitat is dwindling. Because overall, the thought is as resources dwindle, so as our seagrasses dwindle, those main food sources they use may also lower in diversity and abundance as well, because they also use seagrass. And so as these areas dwindle and as these two pipefish are having to really potentially overlap in terms of their niche, um, what are some of these factors that are allowing them to coexist um, without as much competition? And so, with my research, we're using diet as kind of that model, I guess. And so, part of that is yes, we do end up having to take some of them out of the environment so we can dissect them. Don't want to get morbid, but so we can dissect them
No,
and
it-
and
it's a
examine
part
their
of it.
gut contents. Yeah, and examine their gut contents so we can see if they are partitioning themselves in terms of their food sources, or potentially risking very immediate competition between one another in terms of resources as they're limited. So if they're really feeding on the same stuff at the same volume, then then that could potentially tell us that there is some sort of competition there, or there's some other way in which these fish are able to limit competition between themselves. And so, yes, that does happen, but to, of course, kind of keep things ethical, um, before preservation, they are euthanized, which it's never fun to do that. If there was other ways to be able to examine these diets, those of course would be chosen. But also we're under the constraints of different permits. I have a certification that that I had to go through to gain a bit of a better understanding of doing these types of studies ethically as well. And so there was many different types of things that went into this. So we're not just going out and senselessly just taking fish out of the
That's what I
wild.
mean. Yeah. I wanted to clarify, just make sure
Right.
that that is completely understood. You've said to me before, it is very important for you to do it as ethically and humanely
Yeah.
as you can. It's important that, as I said, it doesn't affect any of, you'll put them back if there's no just senselessly taking them out without really thinking about it,
Right.
or the effects it will have, just to make sure that people do understand.
This type of conversation is very important for studies like this, because I'm definitely willing to explain why we're doing it like this, and also emphasizing that I don't just want to go out and kill fish, but we need to grasp this
Yeah.
better understanding of their ecology, because unfortunately we just don't know. But like you said, just keeping in mind, we make sure to have the most utmost respect for the specimens that we have, making sure that we're caring for them in the best way that we can, up until that we
Yeah.
do have to euthanize them. And then, like I said before, like the other day, I caught like 2 Gulf pipefish. Obviously, no, I wasn't going to be taking those to the lab to examine them. And so, like, if we catch that very low number of species, we're not taking them. If we only catch one of those species, if we only catch one of the species that I'm looking at, we're not going to take those specimens that we caught, because the whole point of the project is examining these 2 species as they're coexisting with one another. So if we're finding that these Gulf pipefish, because that's often what we catch if we don't catch our chain pipefish, is all that we're catching in our 10 meter by 10 meter quadrat that we're sampling in, then we're not going to take those fish, because there isn't any point in examining those diets. But we will measure them and everything, so we kind of have a bit of that data in terms of other little population things. But yeah.
I've just realised that I've got this the wrong way around, so I look like an absolute idiot. I don't know if that makes any difference whatsoever. Probably not. How do you think that social media has changed the way that we communicate science, especially in fields like marine biology?
Yeah, I think social media has become such an amazing outlet for science communication. I feel that for me, it really helped me develop the way in which I communicate science. Because even when I'm doing things such as some simple science write-ups, like I just wrote an article about the chain pipefish for an organization that I interned with before, and so I feel that being able to kind of do science communication through social media, it has helped me talk about some of these things, even if they feel like very scientific, but be able to talk about them in a way where the general public can understand, or at the very least feel comfortable to ask questions about some of the things that are talked about. And so for me, I feel like it really helped me kind of develop those skills. But also overall, social media has become an amazing resource for people that are wanting to pursue marine biology. There are so many amazing pages on Instagram. There is Summer Scientist. There is Curly Biologist, who's a shark researcher. Those are just a few of the people that come to my mind when I'm thinking of science communication, but also informing people that are wanting to step into a career in biology, especially marine biology, and what types of courses they need to take, what types of steps they need to take to be able to further their career. And those resources they've given have really been helpful to me as well, because now that I'm kind of looking at PhD positions, some of these resources I've seen on how to go about contacting professors for PhD positions and inquiring about that have been very, very helpful. And so I think social media is a great space for things such as this.
On the same subject as this, how do you balance your passion for marine science with the demands of communicating that knowledge that Alex, come on, with the demands of communicating that knowledge to a broader audience? It's basically the same question, just worded differently.
I think in terms of balancing my passion for marine science along with communicating this knowledge to a broader audience, I've found that obviously, of course, people are primarily following me because of aquarium content, like the cute videos of my porcupine fish spitting out of the aquarium because it wants food. But from that, people come in for that, but then it stems from that to them learning about pipefish and seahorses and other aspects that are marine science related. And so I think that's a really cool thing about social media, is that people may discover you for something and then they end up linking you to other things or learning from you through your other types of content. And I guess like in terms of just communicating that knowledge, kind of like what I said before, just making sure that I know my audience and putting what I'm saying into terms in which they're able to really grasp, but also, once again, making them feel comfortable where they can ask questions. And also, if I'm posting a photo, especially if it's something that people may not see every day, like a flatworm or something like that, making sure that I add an identification of this species, and also, of course, adding a little bit of a fun fact in there as well.
Oh, yeah, that's always good. I personally love it when they'll post a picture of something that's not commonly known what it is, but then they don't put what it is. I mean, I don't know if they do it kind of like as comment bait, so people go, what is that, and then make comments, but some people just can't be bothered, and then you've kind of lost their interest. But it's like, oh, that's what that is. That's interesting.
Right. And yeah, I've seen that a lot too, where people have a video or a picture and they don't exactly say what this species is, or at least some sort of fact about it, so people can link some sort of identity to it, if that makes sense. And so I always think that's important for me. I always like to I guess for me, like through this one internship I did when we were doing a lot of the scuba diving and photography, a big emphasis was conservation storytelling through photos. And so the whole point of that essentially is taking these photos of something that was big with us was, well, this wasn't really during diving times, but when we were monitoring horseshoe crab spawning events, I didn't realize that there were a lot of people that never seen piles of horseshoe crabs.
Is so cool.
There was a lot of people that never really have seen these piles of horseshoe crabs on the shore spawning. A lot of people didn't even know that horseshoe crabs came out of the water to spawn. And so when I posted those pictures, people were able to not only learn something just by viewing that picture, but also the caption about what we were doing in terms of monitoring these horseshoe crabs, they were able to learn about horseshoe crabs and how they're a vulnerable species in the how they're a vulnerable species on the IUCN Red List. And so, yeah, I think it's things like that. And especially like for me, like I'm a very visual learner. So for me, having a video or a picture and then having some sort of informative caption is often very helpful for me and other things as well. And so I know for a lot of other people, that's very helpful. And so I feel like that's kind of how I balance it. I love expressing my passion for marine biology through taking photos and videos and sharing it with other people.
She just keeps finding new stuff to chew on. I don't know how. I was just really subtly trying to be like, get that out your mouth now. With horseshoe crabs specifically, that could be one of those things that see for the first time, and a first impression could be quite important because they don't look really like anything. I mean, I guess people might compare them to insects, I guess, with like the legs and stuff, but they could be seen as scary looking. That's one of those things that people like you give a good first impression of. That's like ingrained in them.
Right.
And then you've just got one positive impression from that. I know that doesn't really make sense, but I think you know what I mean.
No, I definitely know what you mean. And I feel like that's an approach I like to take as well, especially with some of these smaller creatures that people don't know, like our flatworms. Once again, people may have never experienced this animal before. Maybe it looks creepy to some people, but being able to kind of provide the information in a way that's very kind of light and airy to give them a good I guess a good first impression of this animal and just how cool it is, opposed to how scary it might look to them. I feel like that's an approach that I really like to use as well.
That sounds a lot better. Plus, I'm trying to wrestle with the dog. Oh, she's going to go for my hairbrush now. She was going for the hairbrush earlier. No, that's my hairband now. She's trying to wrestle with my hairband. Look, we're not interviewing you. This is Nick's time to shine, not yours. No, no, this is not Elka's. Stop! What do you get off? Get out of it. Why do you go for my headphone? No, not my head. I don't really care if you know my favorite lavender frog that I warm up in the microwave.
Yeah.
I showed it to you the other day.
Yeah.
She found it and she put it outside in the front garden, and it was all wet, and I was like, that is my lavender frog. You've hurt my feelings. Lavender frog is fine. It's made a full recovery.
That's good. That's good.
I was kind of like, yeah, we don't mess with lavender frog because do not chew that. Get out. Get off of it. Please get off of it. Oh, we're chewing it. Let's chew everything. Sorry for the interruption. We're not barking. Now we're barking. Excellent. We briefly touched upon this. I'm sure our viewers. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
No, get off of my dinosaur. She's gonna pull my hat off. I'm waiting for her to pull my hat off. No, hands to friends, not food. I want to ask a question before I forget. Oh God, the chaos is ensuing. What are your opinions on films like Shark Tale and Finding Nemo? Are they fairly accurate, or are they?
Like, I guess for me, when I watch like cartoons like that, I grew up with them, and so before, like, I feel like I've never thought of anything, but now keeping aquariums and kind of being in this career that I'm in, it's kind of a different experience. Like, obviously, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is just a cartoon, but Finding Nemo.
On some level, it must irk you a little bit, just to, like when they're all in the tank.
Well, there's just like some interesting things. Like a great barracuda is probably not going to go after a super small fish like a clownfish, let alone all the eggs in there. So that's always a funny one to me. But also, like the aquarium in the dentist office, I don't know if you could actually keep all of those fish together in
Yeah.
one aquarium. Like, let alone a Moorish idol. So Gil, he's a Moorish idol, and those fish are like notoriously difficult to keep. They have a very, very specialized diet. And so, yeah, I don't know, like all those fish in there, I don't know how well they would do with one another.
I know it's
But
not real, but
right, right. Like I'll always have that fondness for Finding Nemo, but there are little things. I remember like a very long time ago, like in 2021, I made this video, kind of, kind of analyzing the dentist's aquarium if it would actually work or not. And overall, it probably
I feel
wouldn't
like I've
work,
seen
but it'd be
that.
cool to keep all those species together. But I
Yeah,
guess
no,
I
it would be.
yeah. And then Shark Tale, I love Shark Tale
I
so
love Shark
much.
Tale.
But
It's
like,
so good.
I don't know. I feel like
It's
with
one of
Finding
those films. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like with Finding Nemo though, there's like a little bit more realism, at least with like the forms of the fish and everything. Whereas like Shark Tale is definitely a lot more
Oh
what's the
yeah, no,
word,
that's not very. Yeah.
anthropomorphic, and so it's just like I don't know. There's definitely some accurate things in there, but some of this is just very, very outlandish. I love both of
Right,
them so much, especially
right at
Shark
the
Tale.
beginning, there's a sushi chef, and he's like, "What?" He's like,
Right.
"Ah," because he hasn't got any customers. And you're just like, that is a dark joke. Is it a hermit crab? Is it Crazy
Oh,
Joe?
Hermit Crab, yeah, Crazy
You
Joe.
live on a billboard, and they call me crazy. Oh yeah, no, I know
That's
that.
such a good
I know that
impression.
entire film.
Whenever we're out like doing field sampling with our nets, we often catch these like really, really big shrimp, and they have the biggest eyes. And whenever like I'm holding one to like put it back, I'm always thinking of the one scene in Shark Tale where the shrimp is like going on that whole spiel about his like
My
family and
sister
like
had a baby, and
yes,
then she passed
yes.
away. Oh yeah, no, you can tell that one I have done once or twice.
Yeah, the shrimp in there, they look quite anatomically accurate, I will say.
And then she passed away. Crazy Joe again. I do love Crazy Joe.
I love Crazy
You want
Joe.
to see my puppets? There's just so many things in that film
Right.
that are just absolutely hilarious. Fake! I worked 8 years on that. I haven't watched that for so long, and I
I
still
know. I was
somehow.
just thinking that I have not seen that movie in forever.
Where can people find resources if they would like to learn more about marine biology and how to make it into a career?
Yeah, so kind of like how I was saying previously, Instagram is an amazing place to find resources about how to like get your foot into the door to try to find your path to get a marine biology career, or if you're kind of in the midst of your career, how to further it. And so there's so many different accounts. I'm trying to think. There's Summer Scientist, which I think her tag is summer.scientist. There's Curly Biologist on Instagram, who's a shark biologist that shares really good information. I believe her tag is Libertyology. She's a sea turtle researcher. She posts really great content. There are just so many people. There's Marine Bio John, who I'm a mutual with on Instagram. So there's just so many amazing resources on Instagram to help you get inspired, and then also help. They also provide resources on what you should do to kind of get your foot into the door to become a marine biologist. And then also more generally, there's like if you're looking for a master's program or a PhD program or even like an internship, I found a lot of my internships through job boards. So something that I always recommend to people is checking out the Texas A&M natural jobs board. I think it's there's like nature jobs board. It's the Texas A&M job board. There's a bunch of different environmental type jobs and PhD positions, master's positions, internships, things that can allow you to get experience to further your career on there. That is a really, really good resource. I'd say check those out.
Do you have any tips for aspiring underwater photographers looking to capture stunning images of marine life?
I think one of my biggest tips is, well, for one, for me, something that I learned is always keep all of your pictures. Because this has been something that I've been told before. Because oftentimes we'll shoot something, we'll like shoot a photo or a series of photos. There will be some that we don't like, at least right away. But then a couple months can go by and you can go back and you can find that you've really liked that photo, or maybe you want to share an outtake from that previous set of photos that you took. So I've made the grave mistake of only keeping one photo of something that I took photos of. And it's not that the photos that I got rid of were necessarily terrible. They just weren't the way in which I wanted them framed or like how I wanted them to look. And so I got rid of them. But the thing is, those photos could have been very useful to use as opposed to provide further information. So keep all of your photos. Something for people like me who are students and are very not necessarily, well, let's just say broke. People who are broke, especially if you're a student, broke college students, get your camera secondhand. Underwater photography equipment can be very, very expensive. Like, I would love to be able
Yeah.
to shoot using a DSLR camera with this amazing underwater housing so I can take it underwater. But the camera I'm using, it's well, right now I'm using an OM system TG7, which it's an upgrade from the Olympus TG6. I think they just kind of rebranded. I originally started with an Olympus TG6 before getting the OM, and I got that secondhand, which was like, I believe it was like half the price of what it would have been new, which is like $500. Don't be afraid to shoot using a compact camera. We would all love to shoot using DSLR, but if you're able to, if you're able to know and use your equipment, then you can always produce good photos. I mean, I guess when I actually really started first doing underwater photography, I took some of my most favorite photos during those times using this very small Fujifilm XP. Now it was about, I'd say, $150, so expensive, but not super expensive in terms of how digital underwater cameras go. Didn't have a lot of the functionalities that I now have on this more advanced camera that I have, but I was still able to take some really cool photos that I think are still some of my best. Like, there's this flamingo tongue photo that I took that is honestly one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken. And so even if you're not able to get a super expensive advanced camera, you can still shoot really cool photos with it. And so I think my tip is to not necessarily worry about the gear you're using and just worry about the, I guess, techniques you're using, making sure that you're framing your subject in a way that you want. Something else that is very important, and sometimes I find myself accidentally doing this, but making sure that if you're taking photos in an area that is potentially vulnerable to the species that you photograph being poached, don't necessarily tag that location in your photos. Now, this is obviously not something that we think about all the time, but there's been places like I think there's been instances where people have used photos that had like a very precise tagged location, and people were able to go there and essentially poach the animals that were photographed. And so, I mean, obviously, I feel like with every single, like, this doesn't necessarily have to happen to every single place, but if you're at like a very specific location, like here in the Florida Springs, you'll often see a location tag that says be like tag responsibly Florida Springs or something, because you don't want to give that exact location because some of these areas are very vulnerable. If you're filming or shooting photographs at a very specific site that has a very specific species, especially if that species is maybe endemic to that area, or there's just a heavy concentration of this somewhat rare species there. Just be responsible in terms of how you may tag your photo on Instagram, as that you don't want to give an opportunity to poachers to be able to find where some of these species are, to be able to go out and poach them. So I guess just sometimes being mindful of tagging your photos and how you tag your photos if you post them, and especially if you're photographing a species at a very specific site, especially if that site is known for that species.
Are there any in particular that are big ones that people might not know about?
Yeah, well, I know a lot of areas throughout the Florida Springs, it's often good not to tag your location because some of these areas you may be venturing into just may be sensitive. I know on Instagram there's actually a tag for the Florida Springs that says tag responsibly, something along those lines, kind of displaying kind of notion. And it's not always something that we think about, and it's like, and I feel like, and I only learned it like a couple years ago, and I was like, whoa, like yeah, that totally makes sense. Like this could, if I was to photograph an endangered animal that's just kind of really concentrated in this very specific place, that could give an opportunity for a poacher to go out and poach those animals. I guess for me specifically, like there's some specific sites in the Florida Keys where people don't typically go out to snorkel. It's not like a really common place. And so, I mean, you can go out there to snorkel, but I usually never really tag that precise location because there are some very sensitive habitats there, and I don't want people to come in and potentially poach some of the species that we see there.
A question that I'm looking forward to, because I brought it up at the beginning and everyone's kind of like, well, what animals are there then? And now it's like, oh, I've got to wait till. So what animals do you currently have?
Yes, so I currently have a lot of different types of animals. So of course we have our porcupine fish. We have Penelope, the porcupine fish. And then we also have Jellybean, the porcupine fish, who is actually a resident in our aquatic research lab. Now, because of the hurricane currently, we weren't going to keep Jellybean in the lab by himself. So Jellybean is home with me right now. And so that's been fun having another porcupine fish here. And so love our porcupine fish, love them so much. I love keeping aquariums. I feel like that has always been a part of me. Ever since I was young, I've always had some sort of aquarium, I feel. So we have them. We have a striped burrfish named Hector. He's named Hector after the late Budget's frog, Hector, that I first had. And speaking of Budget's frog, I also have my Budget's frog Pickles, who I have now. And then some people may also be Pickles, yes. And people may also be familiar with Pudge, the Budget's frog, but he actually lives up in Indiana. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring him down here to Florida with me, but now he's an amazing asset to my sister's science classroom. So he gets a lot of attention and love from the students that go in there. So that makes me very happy. We also have dwarf seahorses, given how seahorses and pipefish have taken over my life. I love seahorses, and so dwarf seahorses are one of my favorite species that I've really been working with in terms of syngnathidae. I really enjoyed them. Also in that aquarium, we have a dwarf pipefish in there as well. So love those guys. We also have Lana, the chinchilla, and I'm actually going to see if she wants to come out and say hi. So let me see if I can grab her.
I can't get mine out because of the dog.
Over my sweater, but that's okay. This is Lana.
Hi.
Lana. So this is Lana. I've had her since January of 2020. So she's been with me for quite a long time now. Yeah, she's like my little baby and has been like I feel like she's been everywhere with me. I wasn't entirely sure if I was going to be able to bring her down here with me, but I was very happy that I was able to comfortably bring her down here with me, and she's been amazing here ever since. And I couldn't imagine not moving out on my own without her. It sounds cliche, but she was definitely like my emotional support to Chinchilla, even though she doesn't like to be covered all that often.
Oh,
But
I can't
yeah.
even get mine out.
Oh.
I think I said last week. I think I said last week, didn't I? I was like, "Oh, chinchillas." I've done that with other friends that have chinchillas.
Right,
We just met.
right.
They've met
No, they're just
on
the
video call.
best. No, but
Yeah, they're
she's
so cute.
yeah, no, she's like my baby. I love her so much. But those are all the
Yeah.
animals that I have currently. I used to keep quite a few different turtles when I was back home in Indiana. I still have an African side neck turtle back home that my mom really loves. So I just decided
Never
she
find
would
that.
live there and be my mom's pet. I've always been surrounded by pets, and so still am. I can't imagine a world without having some sort of animal in my home.
When I first moved out, not for very long, admittedly, I
Mhm.
didn't have any, and the thought of that, like this was a long time ago, but the thought of not
Right,
having any is so strange.
right,
Or
yeah,
people that haven't, like, it's understandable. Some people just don't have that connection to their animals
right,
because they've never been animal orientated, and it's
right,
just I'm so lucky to have been someone that's always been animal orientated. Our
right,
family was always animal orientated, and there was
right.
always so many different types, and including chinchillas. Anyone thinking of getting a chinchilla, please do your research. I was telling you about Phil E. Chinchilla, wasn't I?
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
I spoke to Phil's owner yesterday. That was confirmed as someone who is going to be on the podcast, which will be
I
really
love
cool.
that.
Going to have Michelle on. It's
Love
always one of
that.
those things that is there's Instagram versus reality animals. I
Right,
mean, it's kind of like that with a lot of animals, but them
right,
especially because of their specific care requirements.
right.
As we mentioned,
Yeah.
teeth, they
Yes.
always need to chew on, and they can't get wet. And the amount I spend on dust is ridiculous for 5 of
Yeah.
them.
Oh my gosh. And yeah, and like all these, like I was telling you when we had that one conversation, like for the most part, and like with a lot of rodents as well, like chinchilla should generally be kept with more than one chinchilla. Some of them have their own
Yeah,
little personalities, like Lana, and just doesn't get along with other animals, and so unfortunately she has to be a loner, and so it's also just important like knowing like the individual animal you're bringing into your home as well. But
yeah,
they're great though. I love chinchillas.
they are great as long as you don't mind care. And
Yeah,
I guess kind of expensive, noisy as well because they're nocturnal. And yeah,
right,
if know enough about them and how they have sensitive backs and they can easily
yeah,
break them, but they do love to
mhm,
climb. So you got to make sure that's safe for them.
yeah,
There's so
and
many
specific foods.
yeah, there's so many different types of requirements for them, and obviously big cages. They need huge cages.
Yes, oh my
It's funny
god.
how they're a communal animal. The two younger ones that I've got, when they were introduced, it was kind of time sensitive, introducing them to each other. Otherwise, they end up like
Right,
Lana and Squishy, because Squishy just he hates other,
yeah,
because I don't think he doesn't know what another chinchilla looks like. So to him,
right,
it's kind of like, what are you? Why are you?
yeah.
He's very defensive.
Yeah, she's a rehome. And so I got her from a couple that had her before me. And from my understanding, they got her when she was very small and she was just kind of kept alone. I mean, she was very well
Yeah,
cared for, but it's just the fact that she was kept alone and now she's just kind of used to
yeah,
that, where it's probably not going to work out with another chinchilla sometime. But luckily, she gets a
yeah.
lot of love and attention.
They are great animals, but again, another thing is long lifespans. They live for up to 20 years in captivity, so
Yeah.
that's another one that you kind of got to think of. All of mine are rescues. Squishy, when I was cleaning him out yesterday, he doesn't really like to be handled. He is a
Right.
good.
Yeah, she doesn't either.
They're fast as well. I know it does. It puts some people off because people have said to me like, "Nah, they're too fast. Like they're so quick." But they're all right when they're relaxed. He's been known to jump on heads. Big on. I sort of really quickly put this question together, so the
Yeah.
wording isn't as great. I know there's so many different things to cover, and it's very broad. For anyone thinking of starting an aquarium, again, I know there's so many different things to this because you've got like brackish water, and then you've got salt water, and then you've got fresh water. It can really impact whatever you have in there. If you have the wrong kind of water.
Yeah, I think we're back.
Tongue piercing is one of those things that you remember you have, and then you're like, now I'm just going to play with it. When I had my cheeks pierced, they're really good to chew on. Not very good for
I
your teeth.
know. There was like, I think it was like 2 years ago now. I got really bad abscess in this one tooth, and so it was like it couldn't be saved. So I just got it's my first molar on this side, and so I got it removed. And so like I thought I'd get over like putting like my tongue in that little opening, but I'm always so I get what you mean. There's like something like going on in the mouth.
Chewing helps me concentrate as well. So when I'm editing, I'll be
that.
sat there with chewing on, like, just anyone thinking of starting an aquarium, again, broad question, but I guess just the first things that come to your head, I guess.
Yeah, so obviously, I feel like this comes with any type of animal or system people want to set up is do your research. Kind of like how you touched on before, different fish have different water requirements. Of course, there's whether or not they need some sort of salinity. So if they're salt water or they're brackish or they're fully freshwater, but also some fish they need different variations in pH. Some fish can handle different variations of other parameters as well that some others can't. So just doing the research of the fish you're wanting to get. Also size is very important as well. Something that I feel that I have to touch on quite a bit when people ask how it's like to care for a porcupine fish, for instance. They'll see my cute little like inch-sized porcupine fish and be like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cute. What size tank do you need?"
Yeah.
And it's like, well, as a full-grown adult, at least 100 gallons or even more. I know a lot of people recommend the minimum to be like 180 gallons. They can grow up to about 8 inches to a foot in captivity. These fish that start out really, really small and cute, especially if they're saltwater. And then also researching the other types of fish you want to put in an aquarium is also important because some fish might not be compatible with one another. Some fish might be a bit more predatory towards some of those smaller fish species you want to put in your aquarium. And also something that I have definitely learned, because I've obviously made mistakes throughout my time of fish keeping, is quarantining your fish before putting them in an aquarium.
Yeah, also a lot of places make sure you do the research there, because I know a lot of chain stores don't exactly keep the fish or animals in good condition. If you spoke to someone that's kept X fish for a certain amount of time and says something against, I would probably go with them rather than what some teen at a store say. I'm not saying every single one is bad. Just make sure that that's another reason why research is good. You can't always take advice from a chain store or even a pet store, depending on the amount of knowledge. It's a lot harder than people realize, I guess.
Yeah, it can be quite difficult. And some people are surprised when people ask me about them setting up their very first aquarium. They're often surprised when I give the advice, especially if they're doing saltwater for the first time as their first aquarium. They're often surprised if I give the advice of going as large as you can go. Because with the larger aquariums, especially with saltwater, there's a bit more forgiveness if you end up accidentally messing something up. When you first start out your aquarium, you're going to mess stuff up. Now, of course, like with freshwater systems, like when I first started, I just had a simple 10-gallon aquarium when I was younger. That was freshwater. Now, luckily, for whatever reason, those tend to be somewhat easier to manage in terms of the parameters. But still, there's things that you need to closely monitor in those aquariums, just like you would with a saltwater aquarium. People are often surprised to say, oh, if you're able to start larger, do that, because there's a lot more room for error in case you accidentally make a mistake. A larger system can be a lot more forgivable.
So are there any types of fish that you would recommend as starters that are fairly, I know it's difficult because the smaller and the ones that are less interesting, quote unquote, people aren't going to want as much, but that's often the case of the ones
Right.
that are the best starter fish are the
Right.
ones that are quote unquote a bit more boring.
Right. 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 Yeah, so I guess in terms of saltwater aquariums, especially if you're not necessarily wanting to do something that is like a huge aquarium, like let's say maybe you want to start out with like a 20 or a 30 gallon, which that could be a decent starter aquarium for some of these fish I'm about to say. Um, I will always say for saltwater aquariums, clownfish are some of the best fish to start out with. Starting with a pair of clownfish is what I did to kind of ease my way into full saltwater systems as well. There's just something about them. For one, a lot of them are very easily captive bred and just very, very hardy, and so they tend to just do quite well in aquariums. They're quite hardy. They're quite forgiving if something was to go awry in your first aquarium. I guess to kind of maybe clear up a misconception is that if you get a clownfish, you don't necessarily have to get an anemone either. Of course, they have that relationship with one another, but an anemone is not needed to keep a clownfish. Now, some people might argue that, but overall, the fact is to start with a clownfish, you don't necessarily need an anemone. Um, but there's also many other fish. There's a really pretty fish known as a royal grama, which we were talking about Finding Nemo before. There's a royal grama that lives in the tank. It's that fish. I think his name is Gurgle or something. He's like half yellow, half like magenta, purple. He's like the one that's like very germophobic. He's like the one that's like purple. He's like longer and he's like purple and yellow. But they're really good beginner fish as well. And there's also quite a few small damselfish species that are also pretty good. So those are the ones that I would look into if you're wanting to start a saltwater aquarium, but you weren't necessarily wanting to go like hundreds of gallons. Maybe you wanted to do a 30-gallon aquarium. Now, in terms of things like freshwater, zebra danios, so good for a freshwater starter. That's often what I think of. Of course, you have your guppies, your mollies, which speaking of, you can actually get acclimated saltwater mollies that are also great starters for saltwater aquariums too. I think those are some of my recommendations.
And is there any equipment that you would recommend?
I guess you can kind of consider it equipment, but it's more of just like a supply. But Sea Chem Prime is so good. If you're in a pinch and you have like an ammonia spike, for example, and you're not able to do a water change for whatever reason, adding a little bit of Sea Chem Prime can kind of give you a bit of a buffer time between the time you can do an actual water change to kind of help lower the ammonia in your aquarium. So I don't know. I feel like a Sea Chem Prime, that's always very helpful for me. And then also, I guess, in terms of thinking about this hurricane, like we might lose power over here. So our aquariums are going to fully just not be functioning. But there are battery powered bubblers that you can often find at bait shops or like even at Walmart's where I get mine, where you put batteries in them and they can aerate your aquarium to kind of help hopefully preserve your fish while power's down. So I recommend those as well.
If you do have something that requires a larger space, a larger tank, just bear in mind water changes, because
Yeah.
as
Yep.
I had a giant tank for my soft shell, cleaning that, doing a water change for that, even if it was partial, doing it in entirety was hours worth of job. And
Right.
if you do have filters, how often filters need to be cleaned and how
Right.
important it is that filters are clean, and checking the thermostats are working, and that if there's any kinds of fish that could potentially damage themselves on thermostats if
Right.
they need to be covered up. There's just so many things. I know
Yeah,
I'm
there's so
sort of
many things. Yeah, like with these dwarf seahorses, I have to use a sponge filter because when I in the
they
past
can get
when I
sucked in.
first yeah, they can get sucked in even in very low power internal filters. I've had that happen before where they didn't really get sucked in through the first little grates that are there, but they got sucked in through this very obscure crevice that was behind the filter. And so I've just opted to use
Yeah.
sponge filters. In the lab, we'll sometimes set up these little mesh boxes, and we'll put a filter in there so the seahorses don't come into contact with those filters. And so, some fish do better with other types of equipment than others.
I did briefly look into keeping seahorses, and then I just thought with all my other animals and the upkeep, and because that's how I knew about jellyfish as well, that you can't put jellyfish in rectangular tanks because they need the circular, that, and it's insanely expensive. They need the circular tank. It's the flow of the water because they sort of ride on it, don't they? They just go and then they can is that what I was thinking, getting sucked into the filter? That's the one I was thinking. I don't know if there's any types of fish that you would recommend to avoid.
I think a fish to avoid, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, I would avoid Moorish idols. They just really don't do good in captivity. They have such a specialized diet with these particular algae and sponges, I believe, that we can't always adequately provide in an aquarium setting.
So where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, so currently you can, of course, find me on Instagram at nick.davis00. Here, I primarily, of course, post reels. You'll have reels of anything marine pretty much. And this is where I also post my photography as well, to kind of share some information of some of the things that I'm seeing while out on dives, as well as while I'm out in the field conducting data for my research. You can also find me on TikTok at nick.animalia. Here, I'm primarily posting videos of all things my aquariums with some more marine biology things sprinkled in there here and there.
That was so beautifully said.
Thank you.
Said. So is there anything that you would like to add before we finish up or talk about?
I don't think so, but I just want to say thank you so much again. This was so much fun, and it's been really cool being able to talk with you. You're so nice. I love all your animals and everything. So yeah, just thank you so much for this opportunity. And this was just very exciting and fun. And I'm glad I was able to do it amidst the impending storm. So
yeah, without being evacuated, because I was
and without power,
is life going to be against us? It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much. I'm sure the viewers have as well, and maybe we potentially get some new marine biologists out of this, or
that'd be
new marine photographers. I can't wait to come and visit you as well.
Yes,
eventually when I get there, because I actually have like 2 degrees in photography. I just don't really do it that much. I studied at college, which is kind of like after high school, and then university, which you call college. University wasn't, to put it bluntly, it was kind of one of the worst times of my life. Just a lot happened, and kind of same with college, I suppose. So but I mean, I do still love doing photography, and I would love to do underwater photography. I'm always jealous of people that have. When you said the cameras, I was like, just a decent camera that you can really with, and it's really good.
Yeah, whenever I'm down at Blue Heron Bridge, that's like photography hotspot. And when I'm down there diving, like I have my little, like the OM System 7, it's a very nice camera and it does really good macro photography. But then I will often see these people with these really big setups. They have these really cool lights on them. And I'm like, I can't wait until I'm able to get one of those setups. Like I have these little underwater dive lights, which work good for what I need. But like some of these people, they have like these specialized underwater strobes and flashes that work with your camera's flash and everything. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I want that so bad. But what I have works pretty well for me.
I guess if you have to wait, good things come to those who wait, as they say. Yeah. So there you have it, folks. A glimpse into the amazing world of marine biology with Nick. Be sure to check out his photography on social media. You don't want to miss it. I can highly recommend. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review and share. Thank you. Until next time, keep exploring and stay wild.